Welcome to the place where the calls are always coming from inside the house. This is PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. Disturbing content follows now. PseudoPod, episode 979, June 6th, 2025. This week, 2 esoteric texts. Old Things Are Meant to Be Found and Shared by Leanna Renee Heber and The Secret in the Tomb by Robert Bloch. Narrated by Leanna Renee Heber and Andrew Lehman, hosted by Alistair Stewart, with audio by Chelsea Davis. Hello there, I'm Alistair, your host, and before we get into all of that, let's have a poem. This is Macabre number 5, Revenants for Howard Phillips Lovecraft, by August Derleth. By owl's light, bat flight in the small hours of the night, I start awake to fearful sound. What trembles underground, far down deep on the perimeter of sleep? What shuddering ululation rises but half clear to tempt the outward straining ear? Who calls upon the ancient ones indifferent to man's race? Shub-Niggurath, Cthulhu with the face of tentacles, Nyarlathotep, Azathoth, who wait forever on the rim of time and space. The hour is late for humankind. In Ryleigh's deeps great Cthulhu sleeps, and Hasta lurks beyond the Hyades. What moves across the stars just past the trees? What monstrous shadow lengthens tangibly beneath the moon? Howard, this is your legacy. Welcome to Mythos Month. That poem is Revenants for Howard Phillips Lovecraft by August Derleth, one of HPL's closest friends. I didn't understand why it was suggested we would run it at first. I have made no secret of my disdain for Providence, Rhode Island's most famous racist, or my exhaustion at how, decades after his death, it so often seems that the Western horror genres remain trapped in his shadow. You'll hear some of that again as we continue the eternal search for the cultural Lagrange point between honouring the past and bending the knee to it. But what tripped me up about that poem is the delicious ambiguity of the final line, especially in the context of the first of this week's stories. That final line, remember, is Howard, this is your legacy. Legacies contain multitudinous non-Euclidean angles. Legacies are protean and shift. Legacies mark the ground for those that come after them, and sometimes they salt the ground too. So, let's talk about Mythos Month. What is this rough beast? When did its hour come round at last? Well, as editor Alex says, the stars aligned and an assemblage of stories demanded to be shared. You will note with interest that we start with a tour guide. That is not accidental. You'll see stories and responses to stories and concepts as we take this month-long tour through the legacy of the mythos and the legacy of its architect. So, to start with, 2 stories, both alike in uniqueness. Each is a little too long for Flash, each is a little too short for a full episode. So we present to you an old-school double feature. One that speaks directly to the concept of this being a tour, as we establish that modern lens on the mythos. And then dive into a story from Robert Bloch, one of HPL's proteges. Similar themes, far more effective than HPL, way less racist. But before we get to Bloch, we should meet Leanna Renee Heber. Leanna is an actress, playwright, ghost tour guide, and the award-winning best-selling author of gothic gaslamp fantasy novels such as The Strangely Beautiful, Eternophiles, and Spectral City series for Tor and Kensington Books. She writes and narrates speculative novellas for Scribed's Everend imprint, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, True Stories of America's Ghosts, co-authored with Andrea Janes, examines the intersection of women's history and ghost stories, and was a Bram Stoker Award nominee for Superior Achievement in Nonfiction. Her short fiction has appeared in Queen Victoria's Book of Spells from Tor, the Castle of Horror anthologies on Tor.com, and more. Her nonfiction essays have appeared in Apex and The Deadlands. Leanna has been featured in film and television shows like Mysteries at the Museum and Beyond the Unknown, discussing Victorian spiritualism. She lectures around the country on themes of Gothic fiction, 19th century women's history, and the paranormal. We will, of course, drop her various socials in the show notes for you. So get ready. It's time for the tour to start. And the first story, well, that's always a true one.
Dear reader, The most curious thing happened on a Greenwich Village tour I have been known to lead as a reincarnate Victorian, antiquated speaker, and consummate old soul that I am. A walking tour that takes guests along the very same paths that famed horror writers Edgar Allan Poe and Howard Phillips Lovecraft walked in prior centuries when they lived in the West Village. I speak passionately about the stories these men penned in and about certain locations, and of course I include the occasional ghost story, as no tale is complete without supernatural influence. I think of Greenwich Village as a spiritual and literary haven, a legacy on its streets and behind its townhouse facades. And I'm hardly the only writer to have thought so. Lovecraft considered Poe one of his greatest influences, and walking in his direct footsteps had to have created a magnificent echo of that melancholy muse. I was nearing the end of my admittedly verbose lecture, building my love of history and of old New York into an artful crescendo when I stumbled across a weather-beaten leather volume placed directly in my path, leaning against the foot of a gnarled tree. The roots had begun to upend the sidewalk, leveled ineffectively to suppress its growth. The black volume, its corners damp with an odd oil, gleamed in the vaguely sulphuric glow of those modern street lamps built to appear historic. The iron posts of replica gas lamps pepper many old neighborhoods where landmarking laws protect architectural treasures from the ravening jaws of modernity's bulldozers. Their amber light illuminates a history reinventing itself into an uncertain future. The volume leaned against the tree like I have been known to lean when I tell city stories, as I love to come into direct contact with the architecture, flora, fauna, brick and mortar of sites and locations I feature. I touch a bit of the past whenever I touch that tree or graze my fingertips along the rough brick that old tree shades. This yellow-paged journal was standing in my place, directly as if I were meant to find it at the foot of my stage. Perhaps, I thought with some excitement, tucking the volume in my messenger bag without interrupting my narrative, this volume belonged to that history. Once I was home again, in the kind of New York apartment that has to be thought of as cozy to justify exorbitant rent for such small spaces, I poured coffee into a teacup and opened the volume. My excitement cooled, and a different energy took over. I shudder to think that I may have been targeted. If I had a choice in the matter, I'm not sure I should have found this volume, but it was found nonetheless. I am responsible for picking it up and tucking it away. Yes, on an impulse, but one of my own volition. Who can argue with what is? But you, if you are the type to be drawn to moldering libraries and ancient relics, you ought to find the following content of interest. As the volume was found outside of an address that inspired the story He, a rather miserable but critical tale written by Mr. Lovecraft during his unrepentantly hateful time in this fine city. Of this address, 93 Perry Street to be exact, it is an average residential pre-war building with an unadorned archway leading to the curious interior courtyard that captured the vivid imagination of Mr. Lovecraft, the courtyard where he, as narrator, was reportedly found at the end of the wild tale. Whether or not this journal is in fact the diary of he himself, I leave that for you to judge, or to dream, or to conspire. Please do think upon the vital matter. The story He was published just prior to Lovecraft's far more famous Call of Cthulhu. Notes were being made on the latter during the publication process of the former. I consider He to be an inextricable lead-in to the rest of Lovecraft's more known canon, a story that opened a certain door, if you will. And after perusing what lies below, clearly I am affirmed in this theory. There would be no Call of Cthulhu without He, and He must surely have existed. If He did, what else? Clearly we, the old ones, he, the acolyte Lovecraft, and all of you attentive readers have played and are playing our parts admirably. We are all connected, you know. Once one hears the call, there becomes one mass consciousness. And at some point, that humming, maddening connectivity is bound to cause the future to shake loose and arise from unfathomable depths. Of course, I was meant to find this volume, for old things are meant to be found and shared, passed along, consumed, brought to bear, revealed, freed from their abyss. I have come to a certain peace. Welcome to what was and may always be inevitable. Sincerely, Author Leanna Renee Heber.
The Height of Summer, 1926. If New York City is to be a place from whence all great old things flow, well, there is much work to be done on this teeming rock, where tides of humans ebb and flow in predictable cycles, where two great heartbeats, one in the morning, one at night, pulse out churning crowds of people onto the grid veins of Manhattan Island, and, flowing from that powerful aorta, they are swept on to their homes and dreams and terrors. So many dreams, innumerable entwined thoughts and delicious nightmares, all tangled up like ivy on the sides of brownstone row houses. I can nearly taste the whole of it. A heady soup of society flavored with hope, flawed with pride, and incubating sleeping germs of madness. Some of these small particles are ready to wake within their hosts. The cult has fanaticism here on this rock. There are wondrous outbreaks on the island that have manifested in various ways, as have pockets awoken across this patchwork country. The New York cauldron is really quite ready to boil, but it needs more leadership, more visionaries, more art, more voices to bring forth the call. This is my particular mission. I confess that I have had moments of doubt, wondering if I am the correct facilitator, if I'll find the right acolytes for this slow and sure turning of time's great wheel towards the end days, when all will rise from the pitch-black abyss and come home again to rule. Valiantly, I try to keep that doubt from taking further root or solidifying within. When I grow worried and weary, I content myself with the knowledge that the calendar of the great old ones does not wax and wane in these same cycles as mine. They slumber peacefully in cavernous depths and await the resumption of their age in patience. Their range of space and time is fluid, flexible. So must I live in harmony with their visions, share in their dreaming black void that encompasses in perfect dichotomy the fullness of a day and the swift passing of a year, all in a mere blink of their great eye. Thinking upon the lengthy stretch of my own existence, the prescience of my task is a balm. I was once a humble squire here in this village that used to be rural countryside and the estate holdings of Grand Dutchmen. My future was bleak and ordinary, destined to be forgotten in a potter's field, but through arcane arts of the natives, and helped along by the beautiful siren songs of the deep. Time is but something I demand to pass, a force under my control. Here, centuries later, as I seek out a brave visionary and in him make my own mark, in this I shall assure my legacy as a critical stepping stone in the new order. To say that I have seen much is an understatement I cannot possibly quantify. The ways in which my life has been extended would be scoffed at and denounced as the most vile forms of witchcraft by the mother who bore me, a woman who so long faded from my mind I remember nothing but her fear. Why must that one sentiment live in such rich and immaculately preserved detail when so much else has fallen away like the rotting walls dribbling away their plaster? Mother's fear. A relative of that dread monster, doubt. It has calcified in me like a stone in my stomach. The state in which Mother mummified her mind had cause in those years, of course, with all the epidemics sweeping up from downtown, and our having to take refuge from plagues like yellow fever, here on what is now known as Perry Street. Here, now, this bustling village of connected buildings is an unrecognizable cry from the rural expanse of yesteryear. It does pain me. A soul is only meant to see so much change in their time on the globe. Some maddened nights, I can't help but use my powers to wipe away the layers of modernization and go back to view a picturesque countryside. I stare a long while, then release the past from my grasp. I can't hold it indefinitely, though some things slip through. An occasional tuft of grass from whichever 17th century lane I was sentimentalizing will remain wedged strangely into the foundation of the 20th century building that replaced it, or graveyard bones will jut up between patches of asphalt rolled over forgotten plots. There is nothing that brings me a wider smile than that, wrenching timelines together in a violent, snapping collision. Looking back at formative worries, fear of cholera and sweeping fevers seems so paltry compared to the concerns that haunt me now. I fear the spirit of those natives most of all, as their restless revenants would seek revenge on all who wronged their people, perceiving me as one of the countless oppressors, usurpers, appropriators of all they were and would never be able to become. Only eyes and the glint of tomahawks remain inside the shadows that seek to undo me and chop short my extended existence. Every night I keep their dark, oozing shadows at bay. The faraway thrum of the Old One's call gives me strength and drives a wedge between converging dark magics. I believe I have chosen a winning side in the battle for my soul, and I will pass along that victory to my charge. How much struggle I can, or should, reveal to my vital recruit, I cannot yet ascertain. I must not seem weak when assessing the candidacy of a man who might be able to create the definitive biblical law on the great Old Ones once and for all. I have to be a compelling pillar, for the time of the acolyte is near. I saw him on a sleepless night when he was walking, a bit desperately, I'd say, if I were to be so bold as to assess another man's psychological state, and in seeing him so, I became both beholden to him and utterly sure of his capability. He walks these streets with a singular purpose and a glorious focus. Every twist and sloped turn of a curving Greenwich lane wrenches the grid of Manhattan streets, twisting the map into the discombobulating innards of this neighborhood, here where time eases its bustling clip and one is forced to confront the old city ways and recall what the city grew upwards from. I can see this man turn away from the cyclopean towers of the ever-skyward modern city and instead choose to stand on an old Greenwich cobblestone as if freed from a prison. Ways of antiquity are his breath of life. These historic streets feed his disenchanted soul, and from this vulnerable place I will enchant him with the last syllables of recorded time. I've dipped into his mind, through the channels of the deep, to learn that he is Lovecraft. A vindicating surname. I followed the man, tracing his favourite Greenwich Village paths. Of course, he seems drawn to Edgar A. Poe's same tread. Whether by instinct or design, he is surely gathering up invisible breadcrumbs of inspiration left behind, yearning for the meaning of his scraps to become clear. Sometimes he takes a notebook from a threadbare suit coat and scribbles a note or sketch, purging some sort of disquiet from his mind. There has never been a better fit than he. I confess, I was impatient with Mr. Poe, whom I watched pace these rounds and for whom I once held a candle of great hope. But while he was not a fit acolyte in life, it was as if Poe planted seeds for this successor Lovecraft to gather. I may always regret that I could not capture dear Edgar, as the man's genius was awesome to behold. But he was too fragile, too gentle a soul. I can't have a nuanced and innovative poet as my torchbearer. I need someone harder. Someone whose anxieties won't snap them in two, but who will rather share their unraveling nerves, page by page, and let the call flow freely unto a readership that will be at first timid and then ravenous. I may always regret that I was unable to get my proper hooks into that poor, delicate Mr. Poe. I shall amend my mistakes and show instead this Mr. Lovecraft my gifts, courtesy of my masters who have allowed me to see the wonders of this world. What are gifts and sights, if not to be shared? Disseminated. The mass of this city and this constantly populating country, the mass minds of this rock alone? Why, will it not be such rich food for gaping, old, and hungry mouths of the deep? I believe tonight is the night. He, this Lovecraft, is my choice. His lonely misery is that perfect match. Anticipation of our encounter has my charm at full. My glamour and my illusions all are burning at their most efficient. Anticipation of our encounter has my charms at full. My glamour and my illusions all are humming at their most efficient. I have to stay focused, as what I will show him will take all my energy and concentration. I cannot, for a moment, slip up. Too much of import is at hand, and the shadows of my enemies are always watching and waiting for a way in. On this night, I declare myself, and unto the old ones, that I shall draw this wandering Lovecraft to my bosom, and share with him the glories of what must come. I will bid him follow me, to slake the thirst of his curious spirit, and lure him down my proverbial rabbit hole. Now Lewis Carroll, that's a man I wish I could have persuaded to the great cause, but I do rather hate crossing vast waters, so that particular alliance was not meant to be. But the Jabberwock? Oh, surely that man met an old one once. But I digress. From dear H.P., who has so little to lose and so much to gain from the sights I shall impress upon him. This poor man loathes the island of Manhattan, the whole of these connected boroughs and tethered souls. I shall release him from the clutches of this metropolis and nudge him homeward. His heart is in New England, of course, to where he'll flee. Of course, as surely my unravelling of time and the visions I shall conjure will overwhelm him. I'll push him over a certain edge, and in doing so, his expanded and off-kilter mind will be ready for the true gods to enter in. I shall make ready tonight, as humanity tiptoes ever closer in every waking dream to its inevitable, formidable end times. From my Perry Street window over a nondescript courtyard arch, humankind marches in a cacophonous dirge towards the sacrifice it was born to perform at the feet of the old. He'll leave me. I know, once all this is done, I am prepared for that. Lonely as I myself have proven to be, I am also prepared to, at long last, die, so that he may see what he must. There's Mother's old rock of fear turning in my gut. What a polished gem it must be now. But there is no way but crawling forwards. Once fled to palliative safety from his providential respite in Providence, the man will undoubtedly continue to hear the call. Once called, you must serve. The call is greater, nearer to the waters. If I, gods forbid, fail with this Lovecraft to bring about the new dawn of old darkness, then perhaps it will be in the hands of the authors of a new generation to tell the old story. History will judge. History lives still. to wake. Listen, history never died. It is its own immortal god. The cults live on despite all efforts to annihilate them, and in this city the voices of the worshippers shall grow, their murmurs bouncing collectively off those cyclopean towers of darkest dreams, expanding the pulsing island's heartbeat to a ferocious noise that shall emit a mind-rending shriek once clutched in the grip of prehistoric claws. Out in the waters, under the streets, on the air, there is a call. All can hear it. Some must devote their lives to repeating it. God's speed. The structure is the point. The structure is the story. The structure is the landscape. Every story in the last few decades of Western horror has made its way across. Not out of choice, but because of a ritual we only see by its consequences. A working we only understand as we experience it. Let's start at the macro. The idea of nesting a story within a story isn't new, but Hebert does it here with some extra sleight of hand that was a very pleasant surprise. I'm reminded of the old John Bolton art of Zatara, the DC Comics character and classic-era stage magician, producing endless waves of unrecognizable offal from a top hat instead of a rabbit. Nor is this the M.R. Jamesian polite discovery of nightmare we are initially trained to see. This isn't a pleasing terror. This is an insidious one. The calls are coming from inside the house because the terror bought the house. Move down a step and into the world and we find ourselves in an idealized version of the past. The sort of reassuring dystopia that constantly threatens to tip over to mayhem, but never quite gets there, as we sit inside the second main character's perspective and find out, well, they like it here. They think the place has potential, and not for the better, or at least not for our better. There are two spectres haunting the popular culture toolbox I use to read this story. Neil Gaiman wrote books of magic. Joss Whedon wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where Spike's reassuringly predatory comment about how he likes having humans around is the first thing that the second narrator evokes here for me. If I'd read this story 4 years ago, that would have been it. Clever tips of a very dark hat, but here, now, in 2025, there is an extra level of horror to the path the second narrator walks through the city, and through my mind. The terror of idols betrayed, the terror of men in positions of power abusing that power, and that abuse being enabled, excused for all the good they've done, as they pull something that isn't a rabbit and never has been out of a hat. Yet again. And finally, we step down into individuals and the long shadow of long dead white men. To Poe and the tragedy of a horror author with too gentle a soul for the work, and to Lovecraft and his racism and his legacy. This is where the story turns up yet another gear for me. There is no attempt to hand-wave away the bigotry of a man like HPL, and nor should there be. Instead, we see him reimagined as infection vector. A man perfectly suited to take these stories out into the world and to stain it with them. A story about the construction of stories. A story about the attempt to change what horror is and to usher in the coming of the old ones, told through a deliciously ambiguous lens. In fact, a pair of them. The first is the clever way Hebert conflates the old ones with the idea of colonialism and the concept that Lovecraft could be being used here as an instrument of Byzantine vengeance or living memorial for the original inhabitants of the planet. The second is the way that the framing narrative changes completely by the end of the story, depending on where you stand. Looked at one way, it's proof that they won. Lovecraft became the man who terraformed horror into the shape his unseen masters wanted, and all we can do is tell the story as we try and survive in the blasted landscape that they have made the world. But the other is that he tried and succeeded for a while. But stories end, narratives shift, and Lovecraft found in an old story is not Lovecraft the infection vector. Not Lovecraft the attack surface for a mimetic assault on horror itself. Instead, he's just an old thing, meant to be found and shared and changed as we see fit. There are no Creative Commons licenses in R'lyeh. Thanks to Liana for the story and for the narration. Our second story this week is The Secret in the Tomb by Robert Bloch and was first published in Weird Tales in May 1935. Robert Bloch was an American fiction writer who danced with genre. He wrote crime, psychological horror, and fantasy, as well as a little science fiction, and he was very successful. Bloch, for example, wrote Psycho. Yes, that Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock classic, and yes, the fact it's known for its director and not the writer is a problem that persists across every creative industry to this day. Bloch was stunningly prolific too, and there is a good chance you've seen or read something of his already. If you're looking for somewhere to start, honestly, Psycho. It's a classic for a reason. Your narrator this time is Andrew Lehman. Andrew is one of the founders and proprietors of the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society and has produced and appeared in films, radio dramas, games, music and audiobook projects based on or inspired by Lovecraft's work, most notably the motion picture of The Call of Cthulhu and the superbly good Dark Adventure radio theatre series. He is an occasional guest reader on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast and the co-host of the podcast Voluminous, The Letters of H.P. Lovecraft. So oil the gate, pick the lock. The truth lies within.
The Secret in the Tomb by Robert Bloch, narrated by Andrew Lehman. The wind howled strangely over a midnight tomb. The moon hung like a golden bat over ancient graves, glaring through the wan mist with its baleful, nyctalopic eye. Terrors not of the flesh might lurk among cedar-shrouded sepulchres, or creep unseen amid shadowed cenotaphs, for this was unhallowed ground. But tombs hold strange secrets, and there are mysteries blacker than the night, and more leprous than the moon. It was in search of such a secret that I came, alone and unseen, to my ancestral vault at midnight. My people had been sorcerers and wizards in the olden days, so lay apart from the resting place of other men, here in this mouldering mausoleum in a forgotten spot, surrounded only by the graves of those who had been their servants. But not all the servants lay here, for there are those who do not die. On through the mist I pressed, to where the crumbling sepulchre loomed among the brooding trees. The wind rose to torrential violence as I trod the obscure pathway to the vaulted entrance, extinguishing my lantern with malefic fury. Only the moon remained to light my way in a luminance unholy, and thus I reached the nitrous, fungus-bearded portals of the family vault. Here the moon shone upon a door that was not like other doors, a single massive slab of iron embedded in monumental walls of granite. Upon its outer surface was neither handle, lock, nor keyhole, but the whole was covered with carvings portentous of a leering evil, cryptic symbols whose allegorical significance filled my soul with a deeper loathing than mere words can impart. There are things that are not good to look upon, and I did not care to dwell too much in thought on the possible genesis of a mind whose knowledge could create such horrors in concrete form. So in blind and trembling haste I chanted the obscure litany and performed the necessary obeisances demanded in the ritual I had learned, and at their conclusion the cyclopean portal swung open. Within was darkness, deep, funereal, ancient, yet somehow uncannily alive. It held a pulsing adumbration, a suggestion of muted yet purposeful rhythm, and overshadowing all, an air of black, impinging revelation. The simultaneous effect upon my consciousness was one of those reactions misnamed intuitions. I sensed that shadows know queer secrets, and there are some skulls that have reason to grin. Yet I must go on into the tomb of my forebears, Tonight the last of all our line would meet the first. For I was the last. Jeremy Strange had been the first, he who fled from the Orient to seek refuge in centuried Eldertown, bringing with him the loot of many tombs and a secret forever nameless. It was he who had built his sepulchre in the twilight woods where the witch-lights gleam, and here he had interred his own remains, shunned in death as he had been in life. But buried with him was a secret, and it was this that I had come to seek. Nor was I the first in so seeking, for my father and his father before me, indeed the eldest of each generation back to the days of Jeremy Strange himself, had likewise sought that which was so maddeningly described in the wizard's diary, the secret of eternal life after death. The musty, yellowed tome had been handed down to the elder son of each successive generation, and likewise, so it seemed, the dread atavistic craving for black and accursed knowledge, the thirst for which, coupled with the damnably explicit hints set forth in the warlock's record, had sent every one of my paternal ancestors so bequeathed to a final rendezvous in the night, to seek their heritage within the tomb. What they found none could say, for none had ever returned. It was, of course, a family secret. The tomb was never mentioned. It had indeed been virtually forgotten with the passage of years that had likewise eradicated many of the old legends and fantastic accusations about the first Strange that had once been common property in the village. The family, too, had been mercifully spared all knowledge of the curse-ridden end to which so many of its men had come. Their secret delvings into black arts, the hidden library of antique lore and demonological formulae brought by Jeremy from the East, the diary and its secret, all were undreamt of save by the eldest sons. The rest of the line prospered. There had been sea captains, soldiers, merchants, statesmen. Fortunes were won. Many departed from the old mansion on the Cape, so that in my father's time he had lived there alone with the servants and myself. My mother died at my birth, and it was a lonely youth I spent in the great brown house, with a father half crazed by the tragedy of my mother's end, and shadowed by the monstrous secret of our line. It was he who initiated me into the mysteries and arcana to be found amid the shuddery speculations of such blasphemies as the Necronomicon, the Book of Ibon, the Kabbalah of Sabbath, and that pinnacle of literary madness, Ludwig Prin's Mysteries of the Worm. There were grim treatises on anthropomancy, necrology, lycanthropical and vampiristic spells and charms, witchcraft and long rambling screeds in Arabic, Sanskrit, and prehistoric ideography, on which lay the dust of centuries. All these he gave me, and more. There were times when he would whisper strange stories about voyages he had taken in his youth, of islands in the sea, and queer survivals spawning dreams beneath Arctic ice. And one night he told me of the legend and the tomb in the forest, and together we turned the worm-riddled pages of the iron-bound diary that was hidden in the panel above the chimney corner. I was very young, but not too young to know certain things, and as I swore to keep the secret, as so many had sworn before me, I had a queer feeling that the time had come for Jeremy to claim his own. For in my father's sombre eyes was the same light of dreadful thirst for the unknown, curiosity, and an inward urge that had glowed in the eyes of all the others before him, previous to the time they had announced their intention of going on a trip, or joining up, or attending to a business matter. Most of them had waited till their children were grown, or their wives had passed on, but whenever they had left, and whatever their excuse, they had never returned. 2 days later my father disappeared, after leaving word with the servants that he was spending the week in Boston. Before the month was out, there was the usual investigation and the usual failure. A will was discovered among my father's papers, leaving me as sole heir, but the books and the diary were secure in the secret rooms and panels known now to me alone. Life went on. I did the usual things in the usual way, attended university, travelled, and returned at last to the house on the hill, alone. But with me I carried a mighty determination. I alone could thwart that curse. I alone could grasp the secret that had cost the lives of 7 generations, and I alone must do so. The world had naught to offer one who had spent his youth in the study of the mocking truths that lie beyond the outward beauties of a purposeless existence, and I was not afraid. I dismissed the servants, ceased communication with distant relatives and a few close friends, and spent my days in the hidden chambers amid the elder lore, seeking a solution or a spell of such potency as would serve to dispel forever the mystery of the tomb. 100 times I read and reread that hoary script, the diary whose fiend-penned promise had driven men to doom. I searched amid the satanic spells and cabalistic incantations of 1,000 forgotten necromancers, delved into pages of impassioned prophecy, burrowed into secret legendary lore, whose written thoughts writhed through me like serpents from the pit. It was in vain. All I could learn was the ceremony by which access could be obtained to the tomb in the wood. 3 months of study had worn me to a wraith, and filled my brain with the diabolic shadows of charnel-spawned knowledge. But that was all. And then, as if in mockery of madness, there had come the call, this very night. I had been seated in the study, pondering upon a maggot-eaten volume of Hierarchus's Occultus, when, without warning, I felt a tremendous urge keening through my weary brain. It beckoned and allured with unutterable promise, like the mating cry of the Lamia of old. Yet at the same time it held an inexorable power, whose potence could not be defied or denied. The inevitable was at hand. I had been summoned to the tomb. I must follow the beguiling voice of inner consciousness that was the invitation and the promise, that sounded my soul like the ultra-rhythmic piping of trans-cosmic music. So I had come, alone and weaponless, to the lonely woods, and to that wherein I would meet my destiny. The moon rose redly over the manor as I left, but I did not look back. I saw its reflection in the waters of the brook that crept between the trees, and in its light the water was as blood. Then the fog rose silently from the swamp, and a yellow ghost light rode the sky, beckoning me on from behind the black and bloated trees, whose branches, swept by a dismal wind, pointed silently toward the distant tomb. Roots and creepers impeded my feet, vines and brambles restrained my body, but in my ears thundered a chorus of urgency that cannot be described, and which could not be delayed by nature or by man. Now, as I hesitated upon the doorstep, 1,000,000 idiot voices gibbered an invitation to enter that mortal mind could not withstand. Through my brain resounded the horror of my heritage, the insatiable craving to know the forbidden, to mingle and become one with it. A paean of hell-born music crescendoed in my ears, and earth was blotted out in a mad urge that engulfed all being. I paused no longer upon the threshold. I went in where the smell of death filled the darkness that was like the sun over Yuggoth. The door closed, and then came... what? I do not know. I only realized that suddenly I could see and feel and hear, despite darkness and dankness and silence. I was in the tomb. Its monumental walls and lofty ceiling were black and bare, lichened by the passage of centuries. In the center of the mausoleum stood a single slab of black marble. Upon it rested a gilded coffin, set with strange symbols and covered by the dust of ages. I knew instinctively what it must contain, and the knowledge did not serve to put me at my ease. I glanced at the floor, then wished I hadn't. Upon the debris-strewn base beneath the slab lay a ghastly, disarticulated group of mortuary remains, half-fleshed cadavers and desiccated skeletons. When I thought of my father and the others, I was possessed of a sickening dismay. They, too, had sought, and they had failed. And now I had come alone to find that which had brought them to an end unholy and unknown. The secret in the tomb. Mad eagerness filled my soul. I, too, would know. I must. As in a dream I swayed to the gilded coffin. A moment I tottered above it. Then, with a strength born of delirium, I tore away the paneling and lifted the gilded lid. And then I knew it was no dream. For dreams cannot approach the ultimate horror that was the creature lying within the coffin. That creature with eyes like a midnight demon's, and a face of loathsome delirium that was like the death mask of a devil. It was smiling, too, as it lay there, and my soul shrieked in the tortured realization that it was alive. Then I knew it all. The secret and the penalty paid by those who sought it, and I was ready for death. But horrors had not ceased, for even as I gazed, it spoke, in a voice like the hissing of a black slug. And there, within the nighted gloom, it whispered the secret, staring at me with ageless, deathless eyes, so that I should not go mad before I heard the whole of it. All was revealed. The secret crypts of blackest nightmare, where the tomb spawn dwell, and of a price whereby a man may become one with the ghouls, living after death as a devourer in darkness. Such a thing had it become, and from this shunned, accursed tomb had sent the call to the descending generations that when they came, there might be a ghastly feast whereby it might continue a dread, eternal life. I, it breathed, would be the next to die, and in my heart I knew that it was so. I could not avert my eyes from its accursed gaze, nor free my soul from its hypnotic bondage. The thing on the bier cackled with unholy laughter. My blood froze, for I saw two long, lean arms, like the rotted limbs of a corpse, steal slowly toward my fear-constricted throat. The monster sat up, and even in the clutches of my horror, I realized that there was a dim and awful resemblance between the creature in the coffin and a certain ancient portrait back in the hall. But this was a transfigured reality. Jeremy the man had become Jeremy the ghoul, and I knew that it would do no good to resist. Two claws, cold as flames of icy hell, fastened around my throat. Two eyes bored like maggots through my frenzied being. A laughter born of madness alone cachinnated in my ears like the thunder of doom. The bony fingers tore at my eyes and nostrils, held me helpless while yellow fangs champed nearer and nearer to my throat. The world spun, wrapped in a mist of fiery death. Suddenly, the spell broke. I wrenched my eyes away from that slavering evil face, and instantly, like a cataclysmic flash of light, came realization. This creature's power was purely mental. By that alone were my ill-fated kinsmen drawn here, and by that alone were they overcome. But once one were free from the strength of the monster's awful eyes, good God, was I going to be the victim of a crumbled mummy? My right arm swung up, striking the horror between the eyes. There was a sickening crunch. Then dead flesh yielded before my hand as I seized the now faceless lich in my arms and cast it into fragments upon the bone-covered floor. Streaming with perspiration and mumbling in hysteria and terrible revulsion, I saw the mouldy fragments move even in a second death. A severed hand crawled across the flagging upon musty, shredded fingers. A leg began to roll with the animation of grotesque, unholy life. With a shriek, I cast a lighted match upon that loathsome corpse. And I was still shrieking as I clawed open the portals and rushed out of the tomb and into the world of sanity, leaving behind me a smouldering fire from whose charred heart a terrible voice still faintly moaned its tortured requiem to that which had once been Jeremy Strange. The tomb is raised now, and with it the forest graves, and all the hidden chambers and manuscripts that serve as a reminder of ghoul-ridden memories that can never be forgot. For earth hides a madness, and dreams a hideous reality, and monstrous things abide in the shadows of death, lurking and waiting to seize the souls of those who meddle with forbidden things.
You have to love a story where the context gets punched in the face. I love, too, how Block sets up this glorious Stygian prose and finishes it with the very human, very short response of beating the evil thing to death and running away very quickly. Folks of a certain bent will suspect I'm being flippant when I say this, and like the man says, let me be perfectly clear, I am not. I love how this story ends, and I love how the language used sets up that ending. It's similar to one of my other favourites, The Hollow Temple, the Dashiell Hammett story we serialised in 3 parts, starting in episode 933. In both cases, you have a hard-bitten, pushed-to-the-edge protagonist facing what seems to be the impossible and reacting with primal fury. In the Hammett, we get a reassuring hint that he may have been mistaken. Block's hero is pragmatic enough to know he's not. When you interact with art, you always do so with bias. My dislike of the idolization of H.P. Lovecraft, my dissatisfaction with horror's tendency to face backwards, are a matter of public record, and if they somehow weren't before, they are now, and welcome to the show. But there is nuance in that, just as there's nuance in everything, and in this story. Lovecraft held repellent views. Lovecraft fostered the work of the man who'd go on to write one of the greatest movies ever made in the Western world. Lovecraft established a vocabulary and pacing of prose that from the blazing wastelands of 2025 looks pompous and affected, but then Block seemingly parodies it here, not out of a sense of mockery, but of subversion, the eldritch extended metaphors and run-on sentences culminating in a moment of escape, of safety. Ambiguity not driven by horror, but by the fact that this time, the hero escapes. In one story, we see compromise and being compromised as horror. Here, we get no compromise as horror instead, our hero realizing their family has carved a road of bones and horror to inevitable death and refusing to go quietly into what is clearly a not even remotely good night. Howard, this is your legacy, and it's a legacy that was being played with from as early as 1935, and with such delicious phrasing as nitrous fungus-bearded portals. Wonderful stuff. Thanks to all. On to the subject of subscribing and support. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we are now formally a non-profit. One-time donations are gratefully received and much appreciated, but what really makes a difference is subscribing. A $5 monthly Patreon donation gives us more than just money. It gives us stability, reliability, dependability, and a well-maintained tower from which to operate. And trust us, as this story demonstrates, you need one of those. If you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out at donations@escapeartists.net. And if you can't afford to support us financially, first off, we understand. Times are very hard. And secondly, perhaps we could ask you to consider leaving reviews of our episodes or generally talking about them on whichever form of social media you are obsessively doom scrolling this week. Our current favourite is still Blue Sky. We have an account over there. We'd love to see you. Please come say hi. We are at PseudoPod.org. If you like merch, you can also support us by buying hoodies, t-shirts and other bits and pieces from the Escape Artists Void merch store. The link is in various places, including our pinned tweet and the show notes for this very episode. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit. And this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but please don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. More true stories next week with Nesters by Siobhan Carroll, with audio production by guest hitter Dave Robertson, Scott in the host spot, and Leanna Renee Heber back in the narrator spot. We'll see you then. And we leave you with this quote from The Courtyard, a 2-part comic adaptation of an Alan Moore short story written by one of my very first bosses, Anthony Johnston, and with art by Jason Burrow. New dendrites twitch blindly together, unthinkable fusions occurring. Beneath me, a vortex of marvelous coinage is opened. We'll see you next week, folks. Have fun in the vortex of marvelous coinage.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.